Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, this is Orphan Last, aka Skylar Madison. Recently, I drew this image. If you guys have seen the video, you know that already. I kinda like it. Some things could be improved. It's one of those sorts of images where I wound up working on it for so long without taking a break that I just lost my objectivity and didn't really see the glaring flaws in it. But one of the big motivators for drawing this thing was to give the authors of Galaxy's Edge a free concept image. If they ever were to make a TV series or a movie or something like that, I would kind of like them to feel free to kind of use this stuff. They don't necessarily have to, but they can. I somewhat redesigned the proportions to the Republic Destroyer from one of the book covers inside of the Galaxy's Edge series. But then I got onto the Galaxy's Edge Facebook group, and someone shared a few concept images that were probably never used for other TV shows and movies, and it got me to kind of rethink things a bit. What if I still retained a little bit of loyalty towards the existing book covers design, but what if I also were to do something with it that can still have somewhat of a Star Wars feel to it, but maybe steer it away from being too derivative from Star Wars? So off camera, I drew out some concept images rather roughly. If you pause the video carefully at parts, you can read different bits of text that I wrote out. You can see some concept images that were being pulled with inspiration. It looks as if it's designed to function within an atmosphere. But it had this interesting bottom belly to it, like a naval ship. And that got me thinking that makes it feel more authentic. Granted, a spaceship doesn't necessarily have to have a round belly. It doesn't need to float in water. But if it were to crash onto a planet, maybe a belly like that might be able to get it to float if it were to land in water. So who knows? I don't think any of the books have explored the Republic Destroyer manufacturing yards, but seriously, who knows? Maybe they could be built planet-side on water once their lower structure is built, that is. And I got a decent amount of attention from the Galaxy's Edge fanbase for this concept image, and I was recommended to post it on their Discord channel. I didn't even know that they had a Discord channel. And some of them are actually making concept images that are full-blown 3D models, some pretty nice looking stuff. And so I decided that since I need to practice my 3D modeling skills, I should try to make this Republic Destroyer into a 3D model. Now, I'm new to 3D modeling, but you'll see me repeat steps from time to time because I just wasn't happy with the turnout of the initial pass, or because later on down the road I would wind up finding better ways of accomplishing what I needed to get done. I know that you can snap objects to one another and maybe even align things to center or to align them onto the same plane or something, but Blender is such a big program that I just couldn't figure out how to accomplish those sorts of things with the software. So all of this is pretty much done by eye, and I don't know if there's any big criticism towards that when working with Blender. Those of you that are good with Blender, if that's just something that is unheard of and no, you should not do that, feel free to leave a comment in the video description below. I tried out several Boolean functions, but it just seems like Boolean functions oftentimes do unpredictable things to the topology of your mesh. So unless you're sculpting inside of Blender, I don't really think that Boolean functions are the best thing in the world, especially for your mesh. Another thing about Boolean functions that I struggled with that wound up making it so that I wound up redoing work from time to time, that is, was committing to a Boolean function way too soon. Sometimes just letting the modifier remain without applying it. It makes edit mode a little bit more confusing, but it also makes it so that some objects wind up to be more unified with other objects if you want two objects to be resting on the same plane, and you have to distort their shape in big ways, as an example. After you've gone ahead and distorted them in really big ways, it's kind of like, alright, now I can apply this Boolean modifier. If you do that too early, then they just wind up becoming out of plane. They're not resting on the same plane. They're not flush with each other, if that makes sense. In between modeling sessions, I'd wind up watching about an hour or two of modeling tutorials that I probably still need to rewatch again and again. I'm starting to use my 3D cursor quite a bit more often, but I wish that there was a way that you could just treat the 3D cursor like a 3D object and slide it around on your axes or something like that. Only and just being able to snap it to faces, edges, and vertexes just came off as a pain in the butt. I figure that most of my frustration in working with Blender will subside over time as I wind up using the software more and more and learning more and more of it, and I have every intention of doing that and getting to that point, but it took a long time just to make the overall basic shape of this vessel. By the end of the video, I have most of the stuff completed when it comes to the general shape of the object, this Republic destroyer, but there's still quite a bit of work that I'd like to accomplish with this vehicle. I want to make something that the authors could very well use in a TV show or a movie or something like that. I really do. That'd be awesome if they actually thought it was good enough to use. So I want the model to have a decent amount of detail. But once I reached that point to where it was time to start layering in a ton of detail, I realized that I should probably start working on a kit bashing kit. Something that I made, something that I can personally use time and time again. And down the road, when I have a website, maybe other people might be willing to purchase it. For those of you that are unfamiliar with kit bashing, it's when you take all these various pre-made bits and start sticking them together to make a quick, high-detailed mech or spaceship or tools or high-tech speeder bike or something like that. Generally, you're using the same little 3D models as parts for all sorts of different objects. It accomplishes a few things really quickly. First, it speeds up someone's workflow to where they wind up with a finished product with a lot of detail rather quickly when they're working with 3D models. But it also makes it so that since all the parts of one object are made out of all the same 3D models as 30 other items or ships or vehicles and such like that, inside of a story or generally inside of an intellectual property, you wind up with unity throughout the entire design of all of these separate objects when you use the same kit bashing kit in order to make all of these different objects. So I think I'll start setting off on a series of kit bashing making kits for my next few Blender videos, starting with really small items like screws, nuts, and bolts, thinking what would a sci-fi nut and bolt look like, or stuff like that. That's something that's kind of on my mind, and then progressively using those little nuts and bolts in order to improve things like walls and other little random shapes that might be used when kit bashing something together. So generally what I'm thinking is starting out small with the small detail stuff and then slowly gradually working my way up from there. So separate kit bashing kits for small things and gradually going up. I think that would be kind of cool. You'll see me towards the end of the video making a bunch of little objects and getting things set up to layer on a ton of detail, but I never quite get to it. That's where I hit the brick wall that I'm talking about here, where I feel like I need to make a kit bashing kit. When I started making the jet propulsion bits to this Republic destroyer, it got me thinking about a number of things that I really liked about the Battlestar Galactica series, before the final episode really just ruined the whole thing for me. Where the vehicles would actually still have rather large engines on the back of the vehicles in Battlestar Galactica, but they still had these little tiny engines all around the vehicle in order to spin the vehicle around so that the vehicle can continue with their forward momentum, spin around, and yet still be moving the same direction that they initially were going. So now they're moving backward. If I'm saying something that sounds confusing, basically what I'm saying is that ships in space don't need to operate with the same physics as they do in an atmosphere. And Battlestar Galactica totally demonstrated that in the best way humanly possible. It seemed like the next step in cinematic sci-fi, and yet no one's done anything with it yet. And seeing as the authors of Galaxy's Edge are using Star Wars as a reference on what to do right for when Star Wars does something awesome, and what not to do when Star Wars does it wrong, I think that ship functionality inside of Galaxy's Edge should kind of possibly work quite a bit like Battlestar Galactica, and to where we wouldn't wind up having stupid bomber ships with fatal design flaws like what we saw inside of Star Wars The Last Jedi. I mean, I guess the K-Wing bomber doesn't exist anymore. Thanks for that, Disney. Okay, so it's not quite finished. There are a few things that I realized that I did a little bit wonky, like, for example, this area right here in the middle, I need to kind of refine it a little bit. I need to have something going on here in the middle instead of up here. But I noticed really early on that there's some really cool camera angles that you can get with this thing, and I need to fill in with a bunch of little gadgets and stuff, as well as things like cross braces and stuff, maybe even turbo lifts, or elevators rather, if you're not a Star Trek fan, ways of getting from the upper level to the lower level. I halfway kind of thought maybe it would be kind of cool if this lower section got broken off, maybe putting some engines on the lower section, but that just seemed a little overkill and a little bit too far off from the initial design that was on the cover. I still need to add that little fin that's on the bottom of the ship. If you don't know what I'm talking about, let me kind of just pull up the picture really quick here. So as you can see, there's at the bottom of the ship, there's this fin on the bottom, just right here, and I figure just to change it up from being like Star Wars, maybe the command like CNC or the bridge in general would be something like right down here instead of up on the top. I think that would kind of change it up a little bit, but if it were to land on water, then it'd be kind of weird to have the bridge on the bottom of the craft. I admit that, but who knows, maybe they have all sorts of sensors to where it doesn't even matter where the bridge of the ship happens to be. But let me go ahead and show you where I got this design, the inspiration from initially. Okay, so this is the cover art for one of the Galaxy's Edge images, and if I zoom in, you can see that the artist drew out Republic Destroyer, and then he just kind of copied and pasted it a bunch of times, which is fine, especially since, you know, ships tend to fly in formation and such like that. And one thing that I notice is, well, wait a second, look at those engines. I'm kind of starting to rethink some of the things that I made on the 3D model, but I'm still liking what I see, and I'm totally down with changing things up a little bit more to look a little bit more like the reference a bit more often. But yeah, it takes up a very small portion of the canvas, and this is the image that winds up being the most in focus. Even though you see the whole thing right here, it's so far away that it's kind of faded into gray. There's some atmospheric distortion going on, and it's really hard to make out all the details. But here, you know, we can see it a little bit better. It's a good design, and this design is what kind of spurred on my previous sort of proportional redesign. It's not like a complete overhaul or anything like that, like this design right here. That cover art got me to draw this, and so from that I wound up making this. And you can actually see right here, this is some concept art that someone drew. I mean, it looks like it's got landing strips for you know, planetary aircraft, so it doesn't really look like, and there's really no reason to have anything even remotely like that on a spaceship, so it doesn't really look like this vehicle is designed to kind of go off planet or anything like that. So that's some of the inspiration for my full-on redesign. It's more full-on, but it's still trying to be loyal to that cover art. I don't know how attached the authors are to all of this, and really I don't even know if they're even remotely interested in anything that I'm doing here. But yeah, there's some really cool camera angles you can get on this thing. So the engines here, they might have to be changed up from being disc-like. Right now they look quite a bit like Star Wars, whereas on that concept art that I showed you earlier, they're looking way less retro actually than they do in Star Wars. They look way more sci-fi than anything. So I might have to change that up a little bit, and it's good that I'm able to kind of switch from one thing to the other and be able to see it. But like, you know, there's so many cool things that you can do with this, with your camera angles. And as I was making it, and I don't consider myself finished with it, but as I was making it, there was all sorts of different angles that I would get on this thing, and it just kind of got me to think, whoa, that is awesome. I'm really happy with the design so far. But like I said, I need to start making little kits, little things, little objects for something like kit bashing, like little items kind of like this, I guess, where you get enough little items like this and stick them together like Lego pieces, and eventually you wind up with a bit of a library that you can do some pretty cool stuff with. I don't think I really did that much. What is going going on here with these two. Looks like I need to just get rid of those because they're not doing what they're supposed to. I also kind of want to include details in little areas where, you know, the camera's not necessarily going to go, just simply because something that I really like about the Star Wars Star Destroyer is that there's so much detail on the Star Wars Star Destroyer that it seems so real. There's details that you'll never be able to really fully see, and it makes you wonder what all of those little tiny parts are on the ship. And so, like, I'm going to add all these little details, little Aztecing little boxes onto the surface of the ship, kind of make it look like it might, you know, the lived-in universe that Star Wars kind of feels like. And if I could bring that to Galaxy's Edge in some way, if the authors ever even consider even remotely using something like this, then yeah, you know, that would be awesome. Anyways, guys, remember to like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to get more notifications from me, feel free to click on the bell or go ahead and follow me on Twitter. A link is supplied in the video description below. You can also join my Discord server as well. There's a link in the video description for that as well. If you'd like to support my channel, there's an image of my mascot in the upper right corner of the screen right now. It leads to my Patreon. Any support would be much appreciated. If you've enjoyed this content and would like to see more, feel free to click on anything else that's appearing on the screen right now. Thank you very much for your time.